My beloved child, stop scrolling and stay here for a moment, because what you are about to hear was not meant to pass you by. Something has shifted behind the silence, and the letter everyone kept speaking about has finally been opened. The words that were hidden, questioned, misunderstood, and carried from one whisper to another have now reached the eyes of the one person whose heart was always meant to read them. Your soulmate has finally seen what was written, and the moment their eyes moved across the first line, something inside them changed. You may not know where they were sitting. You may not know what time it happened. You may not know who placed the letter near them or why they suddenly decided they could no longer avoid it. But heaven saw the exact moment their hand reached forward. Heaven saw the hesitation in their fingers. Heaven saw the quiet breath they took before unfolding what they had once been afraid to face. And heaven also saw the expression on their face when they realized the letter was not what they had been told it was. For so long, people had been talking about it. Some spoke as though they understood every word inside it. Others created their own version of the story. A few warned your soulmate not to read it. Someone said the letter would only reopen old emotions. Someone else said it contained truths that should remain buried. And there were even those who acted as though the letter had nothing to do with you, when deep within themselves, they knew your name was connected to every line. But the truth has a way of surviving every voice that tries to cover it. Your soulmate tried to ignore the letter at first. They told themselves it was unnecessary. They convinced themselves they had already made peace with the past. They attempted to continue their normal routine, to smile in familiar places, to answer ordinary questions, and to act as if nothing important was waiting for them. Yet every time they walked away from that letter, something followed them. It was not fear. It was not curiosity alone. It was the strange feeling that their life could not move forward until they finally understood what had been written. And that feeling became stronger. Pause here, beloved, because this is where the story begins to move in a direction no one expected. The letter did not immediately confess everything. It did not begin with dramatic declarations or desperate promises. It began quietly. Almost gently. The first few lines sounded simple, but those words carried a weight your soulmate was not prepared to feel. The letter spoke of a moment they thought no one remembered. A small moment. A moment between you and them that may have seemed ordinary to the outside world, but was never ordinary to either of your hearts. Perhaps it was a look held 1 second longer than expected. Perhaps it was the way silence settled comfortably between you. Perhaps it was something you said without realizing how deeply it entered them. Perhaps it was the way you walked away while pretending you were not hurt. Whatever that moment was, the letter described it with such honesty that your soulmate stopped reading. Their eyes returned to the beginning. They read the line again. And then again. Because no one was supposed to know how deeply that moment had affected them. They had hidden it carefully. They had buried it beneath logic, distance, pride, and the appearance of moving on. They had told themselves it was only a memory. Yet the letter named the exact feeling they had refused to name. It described the ache they had carried silently. It spoke of the part of them that had remained connected to you, even while everything around them insisted the connection was over. This is why their hands began to tremble. Not because the letter frightened them, but because it recognized them. The words reached beyond the version of themselves they showed everyone else. They entered the private room of their heart where your presence had never fully disappeared. In that room, they had stored every unfinished conversation, every unspoken apology, every moment they almost contacted you, and every night they wondered whether you still felt what they felt. The letter touched all of it. And your soulmate suddenly understood why so many people had been talking about it. But they also realized something more disturbing. Not everyone had described the letter honestly. Someone had changed the meaning before it ever reached them. Someone had taken a message written from sincerity and turned it into something suspicious. Someone had suggested that the letter was meant to control them, embarrass them, or pull them backward. Your soulmate had believed part of that story because believing it was easier than facing what the letter might reveal. But now, with the actual words in front of them, the false version began to collapse. The letter was not demanding anything. It was not begging. It was not placing blame. It was simply telling the truth. And sometimes, beloved, truth is more powerful than any demand could ever be. Your soulmate continued reading, but more slowly now. The room around them seemed to disappear. The sounds outside became distant. Even time itself appeared to pause, because every paragraph brought them closer to something they had spent a long time avoiding. The letter spoke about your silence. It explained that your silence had never meant you stopped caring. It revealed that there were moments when you wanted to speak but chose not to because you feared your words would be misunderstood. It described how you carried emotions with dignity, even while your heart was asking for clarity. It showed that your distance was not punishment. It was protection. Protection for your heart. Protection for their choices. Protection for a connection that had already been pulled in too many directions by outside voices. When your soulmate read this, their expression changed. A memory returned to them. They remembered a time when you could have exposed your pain but remained quiet. They remembered how you could have argued, demanded answers, or tried to prove yourself, yet instead you stepped back. At the time, they interpreted your silence as indifference. Others encouraged that interpretation. They were told, if they truly cared, they would fight harder. But the letter revealed the deeper truth. You were fighting. Just not in the way they expected. You were fighting not to lose yourself. You were fighting not to turn love into pressure. You were fighting to remain kind while your heart was confused. And when your soulmate understood this, regret entered the room. It came quietly at first. A small tightening in their chest. A pause between breaths. A distant look in their eyes. Then the regret became heavier, because they began remembering all the moments when they judged your silence without asking what it meant. They remembered the conversations where they defended their assumptions. They remembered the advice they accepted from people who did not know your heart. They remembered how easily they allowed doubt to speak louder than the connection they had personally experienced with you. Something inside them whispered, "What if I was wrong?" That question changed the atmosphere. They lowered the letter. For several minutes, they could not continue. Their mind moved through memories like a door had suddenly opened inside them. They saw you differently. They saw your patience differently. They saw your absence differently. They even saw their own decisions differently. And then they noticed something written near the bottom of the page. A sentence they had not yet reached. Only a few words were visible because the letter had folded over itself, but those few words were enough to make their heart race. The sentence began with a reference to the day everything changed. Your soulmate knew immediately which day the letter meant. No one had to explain it. There was one day both of you remembered, even if neither of you spoke about it anymore. One day when a choice was made, a message was not sent, a conversation ended too early, or someone else's influence entered what should have remained between you. From that day forward, the connection felt different. But the letter was about to reveal something your soulmate had never known about that day. Something had happened behind the scenes. Something you were never given the chance to explain. Your soulmate leaned closer. They unfolded the page completely. And as they read the next section, their eyes filled with emotion. The letter revealed that you had not simply disappeared. You had waited. You had hoped. You had looked for a sign that your soulmate still wanted you in their life. There was a particular message you almost sent. A particular place you nearly visited. A particular moment when you came close to breaking the silence. Yet something happened that made you believe you were no longer welcome. Perhaps you heard they had chosen someone else. Perhaps a mutual connection gave you incomplete information. Perhaps you saw something that appeared final, even though it was not. Perhaps your soulmate behaved coldly because they were confused, not because they had stopped caring. Whatever the cause, the letter described the moment your hope turned into restraint. And now your soulmate was seeing the cost of that misunderstanding. They had believed you walked away easily. The letter showed that you did not. They had believed you forgot. The letter revealed that forgetting had never been simple. They had believed they were the only one who struggled. The letter showed that both of you had been carrying different versions of the same ache. Beloved, there are moments when two hearts remain separated not because love is absent, but because both hearts are waiting for proof that it is safe to speak. Each person interprets the other's silence as an answer. Each person protects themselves. Each person moves one step farther away while secretly hoping the other will close the distance. This is what the letter revealed. And your soulmate could no longer pretend the past was as simple as they had made it seem. They continued reading. A section of the letter spoke directly about the people around them. It did not accuse anyone by name. It did not create anger. It simply explained how outside opinions had become louder than the truth between you. It described how people often judge a connection by what they can see, while the deepest parts remain invisible. Some people saw your quietness and called it weakness. Some saw your patience and called it uncertainty. Some saw the distance and assumed the bond had ended. But the letter said there are connections that continue speaking even when two people are no longer speaking aloud. When your soulmate reached that line, they closed their eyes. Because they had felt it. They had felt you in unexpected moments. In songs that appeared at the wrong time. In places where your memory returned without warning. In dreams they did not tell anyone about. In the sudden urge to check their phone. In the strange heaviness that came whenever they heard your name mentioned casually. They had tried to dismiss those moments as coincidence. But the letter gathered them into one truth. The connection had never become meaningless. It had only become unspoken. Your soulmate's emotions intensified. They wanted to continue, but they were afraid of what the remaining lines might reveal. Not afraid in a dark way, beloved. Afraid in the way a person feels when they are about to discover that the story they have lived by may no longer be true. Because once truth enters the heart, it asks for a response. It becomes difficult to return to comfortable misunderstanding. The letter was not only describing the past. It was moving toward the present. And that is what your soulmate had not expected. The next paragraph spoke about who you had become during the separation. It described growth no one had seen. It spoke of how you learned to carry yourself with greater strength. It told of the nights when you rebuilt your faith, your confidence, and your sense of purpose. It explained that you were no longer waiting in the same way. You still cared. But you were no longer willing to abandon yourself for an uncertain connection. You still remembered. But you had learned that love should not require you to remain trapped in confusion. You still held tenderness. But now that tenderness was joined by wisdom. When your soulmate read this, another feeling appeared. Urgency. They realized time had not frozen. They had imagined that if they ever chose to return, everything would be exactly where they left it. They had quietly assumed you would always remain emotionally available, always ready to understand, always willing to wait. The letter shattered that assumption. It revealed that your heart had grown. And growth changes what a person will accept. Your soulmate understood that reading the letter was not only about discovering how you once felt. It was about realizing that they might lose the chance to know how you feel now. That thought unsettled them. They stood up from where they were sitting. They carried the letter across the room. They looked out of a window, or perhaps walked toward a quiet place where no one could see their face. They needed space because the emotions were becoming difficult to hide. One part of them wanted to contact you immediately. Another part feared that too much time had passed. One part wanted to explain everything. Another part wondered whether explanations would sound like excuses. One part believed the connection deserved another chance. Another part remembered how much uncertainty had already existed. This inner conflict did not weaken the truth. It proved how deeply the letter had entered them. And then something extraordinary happened. Their phone lit up. A name appeared. It was someone connected to the letter. Not you. Someone else. Someone who knew more than they had admitted. Your soulmate stared at the screen. The timing felt too precise to ignore. The letter was still open in their hand. Their heart was already full of questions. And now the person who had once shaped their understanding of the situation was trying to reach them. For a moment, your soulmate considered ignoring the call. But something within them said, "Answer." They did. The voice on the other end sounded different than usual. Less confident. More cautious. There was a pause before the person spoke. Then came a question your soulmate was not expecting. Did you read it? Your soulmate did not immediately respond. The silence became heavy. The caller already knew the answer. They could hear it in your soulmate's breathing. Then the person said something even more revealing. There is a part you need to understand before you reach the end. Those words changed everything. Why would anyone need to explain the letter before it was finished? What was hidden in the final section? Why had this person waited until now to speak? Your soulmate's grip tightened around the page. They asked, "What did you know?" Another pause. Then a confession began. The caller admitted they had seen the letter before. They had known what it contained. They had even known how deeply it might affect your soulmate. But they had withheld something. Not necessarily because they wanted to destroy the connection, but because they believed they were protecting your soulmate from emotional confusion. They convinced themselves the timing was wrong. They decided certain truths would only make life more complicated. They assumed they knew what was best. But heaven sees what human certainty often misses. Protection without truth can become interference. Silence can become a wall. Good intentions can still create painful consequences. The caller's voice softened. They said the letter had originally included another page. Your soulmate felt their entire body become still. Another page. A missing page. A page they had not received. Suddenly, everything in the letter felt unfinished. The emotional progression, the careful wording, the reference to the day everything changed, it was all leading somewhere. Your soulmate had sensed there was more, but they never imagined part of the message had been physically separated. They demanded to know where the missing page was. The caller hesitated. Then came the answer. "I still have it." At that moment, your soulmate's emotions changed from regret to disbelief. The person had kept the final page all this time. They had watched rumors form. They had watched distance grow. They had watched both of you create lives around an incomplete truth. And still, they had remained silent. Your soulmate asked the question that had been rising inside them since the beginning of the call. Why? The answer was not simple. The person explained that the missing page contained a decision. A decision you had once been prepared to make. A decision connected to your soulmate's future. Something sincere, vulnerable, and life-changing. They feared your soulmate would respond emotionally and abandon plans that seemed stable at the time. So they removed the final page. They told themselves they would return it later. But later became weeks. Weeks became months. And eventually, too much time had passed. The guilt became easier to hide than the truth was to confess. Until now. Beloved, stay with this moment, because your soulmate was now standing at the edge of a revelation they had never imagined. The letter they believed they had finally understood was still incomplete. The deepest truth had not yet been read. They asked for the missing page. The caller agreed to bring it. But then they issued a warning. Before you read it, you need to know that the person who wrote it may not feel the same way anymore. Your soulmate looked down at the letter. That warning struck the exact fear already moving through their heart. What if the truth had arrived too late? What if the missing page contained words that were once alive but no longer belonged to the present? What if they had been given the answer only after the question had changed? Still, your soulmate knew they had to read it. Not because they wanted to live in the past, but because they could no longer build their future upon an incomplete story. The call ended. The room became silent again. But it was not the same silence as before. This silence was filled with anticipation. Your soulmate looked at the pages in their hand and began rereading certain lines. Now every sentence carried a second meaning. Every emotion seemed to point toward the missing ending. They wondered what decision you had written about. Had you been ready to return? Had you been ready to confess something? Had you been ready to ask them to choose? Had you been planning to leave forever? Or had you revealed something so deeply personal that the person who removed the page believed it would change the direction of two lives? Your soulmate began pacing. They imagined seeing you again. They imagined calling your name. They imagined your reaction if you discovered the full letter had finally been read. Would you be relieved? Would you be angry? Would you remain silent? Would you tell them it was too late? That final possibility stayed with them. It followed every thought. Because the letter had shown them one undeniable truth: you had once cared more deeply than they understood. But it had not yet shown whether the door was still open. And then, as your soulmate waited for the missing page to arrive, they noticed something written faintly on the back of the last page already in their possession. It was not part of the main letter. It looked like a note added later. The handwriting was smaller. Almost hidden. Your soulmate turned the page toward the light and read the first few words. Their breathing stopped. The note said, "If this letter ever reaches you without the final page, then someone has made the choice for us." Your soulmate stared at the sentence in disbelief. You had known. Somehow, you had feared the letter might be altered. You had left a hidden message in case the truth was interrupted. Their eyes moved to the next line. If that happens, do not believe the first explanation you are given. The caller was already on the way. The missing page was coming. But now your soulmate realized the person bringing it might not have confessed everything. There was another secret. A deeper reason the page had been removed. And beneath the hidden note was one final sentence, a sentence that made your soulmate reach for their phone with trembling hands. It read, "The truth is not only about how I felt, it is about what happened the night you thought I chose to leave you."